Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Could I get a designated note taker for today?
I'm happy to do it.
Appreciate that, Michael. Um, I don't see any new faces, so I think that we can jump right into um the RFCs, and I think this will be pretty quick because I don't know that there are many updates. Excuse me. Um, let's start with the only one that's open, which is proposal to add OCI image annotations to Buildpacks. There is an open RFC in the upstream. It looks like there's some good conversation happening and some pretty nice back and forth conversation happening. Um, I still need to go in here, just read this, and then provide my support. I've been getting sidetracked. It will only take me, it's one of those things where I need to sit down and do it, and it probably won't take me all that long, but I haven't gotten to it. Um, yeah, and I think there's some good discussion happening here. So uh if you have a chance to take a look at that and would like to provide any support to it or anything like that, feel free. Any questions or anything on this? Gotcha. Um, as for any of these other ones, I have no update on my particular RFC, which is the decoupled dependency RFC. And I do not know the status of the multi-arch build packs published proposal. Um, as it stands, I think that honestly, the work is just going forward without this. So I don't think this is blocking or like this is anything that needs to be, handled right now. But yeah, I'm unfamiliar with the status of this. Right. I think that takes us to the end of that. So next up we have CMB updates. I know that Ozzy was in the CMB working group meeting asking about moving things from experimental. I don't know anything else about that because I was not in that working group meeting because I had the wrong date on my calendar. So I tried to go to like a 1 o'clock session that didn't exist. Um, uh, so yeah, I'm unfamiliar with that any updates on that. And if you are interested, it would probably make sense to reach out to
Yeah, I
Ozzy.
don't have any updates either. I haven't heard from Ozzy, but will be interesting. Good to know that that happened. I can follow up with him.
He was at least at the previous working group meeting that
Okay.
because I was on the note sheet trying to get in, and that's when I realized everything was inverted.
Right.
Um, project update. There is an open discussion question. I will hunt it down and attach it here. That is around um, sort of trying to evaluate which maintainers are still maintaining in the project. Um, I think that uh,
Yeah.
there is with what happened to what was it, gzip? Uh, there is some want to make sure that only the proper people have permissions to push code. So
It wasn't gzip, it was xz,
yes,
right?
sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I could not remember the particular compression algorithm information.
It was in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Hey, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Uh, yeah. So if you are an active maintainer and contributor, I think that Anthony, you were like, these are the people that I've seen going around recently. And I think that a lot of people were mentioned in that, but you might want to just check it out and put a thumbs up on it. And I can hunt that down and put a link here if that would make everyone feel better. But I think it's the most recent discussion or one of the more recent discussions. Or is it an issue? Oh, whatever. I'll hunt it down. So, and then I don't have any other project updates per se. Anyone else have any? I found the link. All right, if there's no more project updates, then we can get into open mic questions and discussion topics.
Yes, I would like to ask something. It's a little bit more technical to the code level. Specifically, there are some pull requests that add a version to the Go modules. For example, let's say on the node start, I can paste the link.
I think I know what this is going to be on, and oh wait, maybe not. I thought I knew what this is going to be on, and I don't. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, if you consider that the V2 characters have been added, and this is used in Go in order to version a module. So external modules, when they consume it, they can stick to a specific version and not always be on the latest.
Yeah.
This change sounds reasonable to me, but the question is why hasn't been adopted yet from all the modules that exist under Paketo Buildpacks? And I'm doing this question because there might be something that I cannot see at the moment. So this change might seem reasonable, but in the end it's something that Paketo Buildpacks has choose not to follow for a specific reason. So, I mean, do you have any insight if we should follow this kind of practice or not?
It's a good question. I guess it's something that we hadn't thought about, and that because everything continues to work, it was not something that was top of mind. I'm intrigued by this because these are all referencing effectively internally, right? So so this node start, what it's referencing right now is referencing like this file here, right? Like this build go, right? Because it's because it's main.run, or it's referencing, like oh, this has no other modules, but it would be referencing whatever's in here. So do you actually have to do the same module bump? Because if so, have we not just been releasing like stale code and it hasn't been being checked in the integration tests?
I guess it's like, is it the opposite? Is it that like without that you get the latest?
That is, I have no idea. Because if that were the case, then that would be, we would probably not want to add that /v2. We would want whatever is in these packages, right?
Right, like I guess I'm not a Go expert, so I thought that like adding the V2 might pin it to a particular Sember major, and then you might need to update it when there is a new Sember major. I don't know, Costas, do you know, like that we didn't have, like I don't have enough context, so we were wondering if like the project as a whole, like if you guys had that context and you could just say, yeah, well, we do it this way because
So I guess to be fair, my understanding is something like hold on, I'm gonna start pulling up an example because that's the only way I can, my brain can think about this, is like you can actually gate on a release, but like that release, like, and say something like packet is branched. So I think when you're doing an internal reference like this, if there's no branch, it is arbitrary, and I don't think that the actual like GitHub release you attach to it matters in the same way. But I'm also not like that. This is like an interesting use case to me because it's like this node start is referencing this package so that it can pull in this go, right? Because technically it's in a separate package.
Yes.
That is, I think that's a pretty nuanced to go question that I'm not 100% sure how that should work off the top of my head.
This kind of technique or whatever is already in some of the packages.
So do you have one of those examples? Because maybe we could look at it and see if
Yes.
there's a reason that that makes sense, or like it seemed like we should do it everywhere or nowhere was kind of the
Yes.
right. Like somehow it makes sense, or because I don't know that any, unless there's a special case that says like, hey, this one is different for some reason.
Have,
Oh, all right, hold on. That might be the differentiating factor here. Yeah, all right, cool. So it's going to be actually like what the module itself is named. So or at least that's what it appears, right? So in this Go module, we've never done a version to Go module here. And I think that the reason you would want to do like a version to Go module in this case, because would be if you actually wanted this to be used as a Go module, right? Every the thing is every Go library can inherently be used as a Go module, which may or may not be what you actually want. So like watch exec might have something like it might have in it something like maybe watch exec is a bad example, but like you could have a build pack like source removal, right? Where it is a build pack, but also it has been written in such a way that you can use its underlying pieces as a library, right?
yes.
So I don't know that you do the same thing for node start. So what I would say is like, does that does that in a does this how does that pass? This is confusing me because I don't know that I understand. Oh, it passes because they also changed the Go module. Yep.
Yes, if you go and change the initial on the go.mod file, inevitably you will have to change it everywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
Because probably it's under another package. Okay. So yeah, okay, I understand it's not meant to be used, or maybe the intention while they were writing the module wasn't to be consumed from other external modules. But
Well, what
what
does that be like? Why would you do it still? Like, why is it done for watch exec?
I don't know why it's done for watch exec, but like you would do it for something like a library like this so that you could maintain multiple version lines. So if we actually go to this, we can see that the last contribution was done 3 years ago.
Right.
And so if you go to the Go mod, could refer to that. So you could still do something like remove so like you as an individual could have like a version lined module, right? So you could be using packet v1 or packet v2 and
Right. I've
switch
seen
over.
that. Right. Okay. So like I could see it if we decided we wanted to maintain multiple version lines versus using the latest.
Yeah, but even then I would say even if you wanted to be like, okay, let's say that for Node you want to maintain like 2 version lines or whatever, unless it's being used as a unless it's being used as a library, there's no reason to update the module, right? Because you don't need to differentiate it, right? What that saves you from having to do is like having to pin to particular like SHAs in branches, right? It allows
Right.
you to differentiate between those two. But if you don't ever intend that being used as a library, I don't know that I know the reason to update that. I guess we could look at. I guess we could get
And again, like I
this
see
one
no
here.
reason why Node would be managed differently than the other one. So like that's where it kind of like, it would be good, like, I think as a overall project to say, well, like, we should maintain these as something that you can do that way, or no, it doesn't matter, because like, I think it's more work, right? Like,
It would be more work insofar as that, like, every time you did a new major, you would have to add a new module. And also, like, you're kind of lying because we don't maintain a version line. I mean, like, we didn't
right,
really maintain a version line for Packet, but like it made more sense for that. Like, at no point are you going to go back to make a new branch, or like as it stands right now, we don't go back to make a new branch to uh update something in that sub branch where having the module attachment would be important, right?
right. Yeah, I like, we only maintain the heads effectively, right? And they're published using Semver, so you can sort of accept your changes or not, but we don't have a V2 line that you'll get updates for. So if you actually pinned it to V2, you might not get changes. Like, you wouldn't be aware of changes that are coming necessarily.
Yeah, and the way that you would also pin it is like we attach like tags to the images, right? Where you're like,
Yeah.
I want all of the 2.2 line, right? Like whatever. Yeah, I don't know that it would be 100% worth it, but like that's also there's nothing. I don't think that there's anything like what am I looking for? Like execution, like there's nothing fundamentally wrong about it. I don't even know that there's anything necessarily 100% stylistically wrong about it, except for maybe it implies that it is a library when it is not.
Right. So I could agree. There's no reason to say don't do it if you think it's going to help you, but like,
But there's also no reason to
it sounds
do it
like
as
there's no
well.
reason to do it. And from my perspective, if we don't have a reason to do it and it's more work, I would prefer not to do it, right? Because then, like, it just, things just tick over versus, okay, now you've got to update these other things. And if you forget, you're getting stale versions of things. And
Yeah, I think that I am in the same camp. I personally probably wouldn't do this.
okay. I don't know, Costas, if that answered the questions or.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely would be an insight to ask the person who did the PR, like why specifically he would like to have versions. Is he planning to use this module somewhere else, especially inside on the Paketo Buildpacks, or just because the documentation says that?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
would
I think
be
go ahead.
that would be really interesting. I'd be really curious if it's just following go best practice, or if like they're doing something like oh yeah, I'm doing this because we're actually using all of the logic, but we've replaced all of the underlying like interfaces that you use, which like you could do, right? Like you could take the build logic and replace the underlying interfaces to do something special, which would be interesting. I can't imagine that that's what's happening, but I would be curious to know what is going on there.
Yes, and especially is in a project that's a personal project, for example, and he would like to have versions, or is inside Paketo Buildpacks. Because each module that we have has a specific use case. So in that case, if it's a personal project, like I think don't have to put extra work, as you said, especially for one person. Or, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think,
yeah, if it's I mean, if it's extra work for if it's for the Paketo Buildpacks, yeah, okay, it might work. But if it's one person for a personal hobby project, like, I don't think also we should do that, right? I
yeah,
don't
I
know.
think we could post in the issue, like, we chatted about this. This doesn't seem to be typical practice within the project, and it would take more work because we would have to do these updates. So, like, can you tell us a little bit more about why,
Yeah.
why you think, why, tell us more about your use case, because like generally it's not something that's done, and that can kind of set the expectation that, like, unless there's a good reason, we probably wouldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. I'm good with that. Thanks for the insight.
Awesome. Are there any other open mic questions or discussion topics?
Yeah, also would like to ask something else.
Sure.
Do you for the stacks, for example, or for the builders? Correct me if I'm wrong. You create a new repo each time that you have a new stack. Is there, I mean, you can have the same stack. If you have you can have multiple stacks under one repo.
Yeah. I think that one of the reasons we do that is for release logic. So like we cut GitHub releases, although the GitHub releases aren't like that important, but they have the release notes on them. And they're also like that's also the same logic that we use to actually dictate the release inside the action. Um, I would say that like it part of that is that like GitHub doesn't have a strong like mono repo release with like mono repo with multiple product release structure, if that makes sense. So like generally speaking, like it would be like um you know we played around with the idea of like having all of the build packs separate, like all of the node in JS build packs separate, but each all of them being in the same repository. So it would be like a superstructure of like Node Engine, Node.js, like all of that, right? But you can't really do that super appropriately in GitHub because you can't like cut separate releases of sub repositories or sub projects in the repositories at one time if not everything is changing at the same time, right? You kind
Okay.
of have to cut a release of everything or nothing. And so with something like we wouldn't want to put something like tiny and full together because full is going to get updated at a much higher cadence than tiny. And so finding out if tiny made a release, making sure that we do all of the release logic for it, like it's just it's extra checks when it's easier in some ways to just create a new repository to do that. I'm not
Yes.
saying that's right or wrong. It's just the we found it to be the easier structure.
Yeah, having the full, the tiny, and the static or whatever makes sense. But for example, having Jammy tiny and Noble tiny, like couldn't these two be under the same builder or the same? Sorry, the same stack.
Like under the same repository.
Yeah, under the same repository.
Um,
So
but,
because
but
you can have the release will push the registry and it's time, for example, another build pack or another builder that includes this builder will mostly check the Docker registry or the Google registry, not explicit. I mean, you
I
can anyway.
I guess, but I don't know that I understand any more advantage of doing that over having a separate repository. Like the separate repository creates like I guess you could say like bloat, quote unquote, but at least you have a specific repository that you can go to where you know that that is what it's dealing with. And that bloat is a replacement for potentially more complex logic as well.
Yes.
Because once again, like not necessarily I'm assuming for the most part, like Jamie and Noble, like if there's a update to a package, it's probably pretty similar. But like I also don't know, like the universals that we install could be different between Noble and uh Jamie. So like it's once again like this situation where like is it worth us creating logic to basically like like poll check both of the um stacks, if one of the stacks is good and the like have the logic to see which one is like built and which one isn't, have the logic to then create a release, and then from that release like also push to like all of the correct repositories with the correct, you know, like information. Like maybe it is, but like I don't know that I see the burden of having to go from one repository to another often, mainly especially in the stacks, right? Because those are so static.
Yeah, I see.
Now, maybe you could make an argument of like it's harder to verify the hygiene of everything because it's all spread out, right? Like, oh, tiny jammy is fine, and like all the jammy stacks are fine, and almost all the noble stacks are fine except for tiny noble, and so I have to go to 6 repositories instead of 3 to verify that everything is released. But even then, like I would actually probably want a separate repository to have to troubleshoot why one of those stacks is not releasing, instead of kind of having to like orchestrate the correct number of actions pointing at the correct sources.
Yes, I see. But on the other, you will have the trade-off of having a GitHub config. So, but anyway, yeah, I mean, okay, I understand.
Yeah, I guess the GitHub config does solve that to some extent, right? By like making sure you have common files that you only have to edit once, even though there's multiple copies of them.
Yeah, and I don't know if GitHub config is 100%. I mean, obviously pipeline builder exists too, so like I think there's ways of doing that. I wish that GitHub had some overarching like way of doing that, right? Where you could inject workflows into specific repositories and that sort of thing. So you could only truly, and they did all of the consistency and that sort of thing.
Okay. Thank you for discussion.
No
I
problem.
was really curious about that. And
I think that one of the trade-offs this project made like 4 years ago was basically we decided that like directory burden was simpler than like CI workflow burden. And so that's sort of how you end up with like, oh, everything's in its own repository, and that kind of sucks because you have to like hunt down this one thing and you have to like look through a bunch of stuff. But like it makes it so that you can make a lot of uniform CI, do one task for one thing, and get one release. Instead of because I think that if you built some of these larger mono repos, you would end up with a lot more like bespoke CI bits, right? Like you'd have to be like, all right, for Node, I have to release like these as this and these as this. Whereas the other ones, you can sort of be like, I classify this subset of directories as one thing, this subset of directories is another thing, et cetera, et cetera.
okay, nice.
All right. Are there any other open mic questions or discussion topics? All right. Well, thank you all. This is a great discussion.
Thanks. Bye.
See ya.